Hey everyone, welcome back to Stadium Stats. Today we're going to be taking a look at Week 15 of the NFL schedule, predicting the winners and losers of every single game and reviewing the previous week's action. So without further ado, let's jump right into it. First off, on Thursday Night Football, we've got a matchup between the Falcons and the Buccaneers. And yes, this is a divisional matchup that has a lot of implications for the NFC South, as the Buccaneers and Panthers are tied currently for the lead of that division, and whoever ends up coming away with the better record, especially considering they still have two matchups against each other, are going to win that division. Seeing as neither of those teams are very likely to make a wild card, that seems to be either of those teams' only avenues to the playoffs, and it looks like the Falcons have a chance to play spoiler to the Buccaneers on Thursday Night Football. The Falcons, they're coming off a loss in a game where they got destroyed by the Seahawks 37-9. It was pretty even through the first half, and then they really lost control of the game in that second half and played pretty abysmal on both offense and defense. Kirk Cousins, clearly not the answer, seeing as Michael Penix has been out and is out for the rest of the season, and that team is struggling without him, even though he didn't look that exceptional himself while he was playing. The Buccaneers, on the other hand, they're coming off a loss as well. They lost to the division rival Saints, who are only getting their second win of the season. Really just not a great performance by the Buccaneers, seeing as the Saints now have 3 wins on the season, 2 of which being divisional wins over the Buccaneers and Panthers. The Buccaneers really have just been on a downward spiral since the first half of the season, where Baker Mayfield had that team in conversation for the best team in the entire league, and he was in the MVP conversation, and they've really just spiraled since their 5-1 start and need to really get control of themselves to stand a chance of making the playoffs. They need to take control of this downward spiral and turn things around, especially before their first and second matchup with the Panthers, who are competing with them for the division. I do think the Buccaneers are still a better team than the Falcons, especially considering how inconsistent the Falcons have been and considering their injuries. So I am going to go with the Buccaneers to win, but I wouldn't be surprised, especially considering it's a divisional matchup and how that has been going for the Buccaneers, if the Falcons can put up a fight or even win that game, but I will pick the Buccaneers. Up next, we have another divisional matchup between the Ravens and the Bengals. The Bengals, they're coming off a loss to the Bills in a heartbreaker where Joe Burrow played excellent through the beginning of the game and then threw a pick 6 to give the Bills the lead, and the Bills ended up coming away with a victory late in that game, despite being down with just 5 minutes to go, with the Bengals having the ball. Joe Burrow did throw back-to-back interceptions, which did basically cost them the game, but it was really the defense of the Bengals that cost them the game yet again. Tell me if you've heard that one before with the Bengals. Bet you have. Probably because Joe Burrow continues to put up 33-plus points in every single game that they end up losing. It's ridiculous how bad their defense is, seeing as they put up 34 points in this game and lost because the Bills put up 39. Just abysmal defense by the Bengals, and really unfortunate timing for Joe Burrow's interceptions. But it's hard to blame him because he's the one who put them in the lead of that game in the first place with his 4 touchdowns. The Ravens, on the other hand, they're also coming off a loss to the divisional opponent of the Steelers in a game where they just looked okay. They continue to look all right throughout the season. They're very inconsistent. They're not the typical Ravens team we've come to see. Their defense isn't dominant. Their offense isn't dominant. Lamar looked better in this game than he had in previous games, but still didn't look great, and they lost with a score of 22-27 against their biggest divisional opponent, seeing as the Steelers and Ravens are playing basically for the lead of that division to make the playoffs. Doesn't seem like either of them will get a wild card based on the records in the AFC, considering there are enough teams that are ahead of them. However, those two teams are competing for the division lead to get that playoff spot, and the Ravens ended up choking that game away, losing 22-27. I do think the Ravens, despite losing to the Bengals on Thanksgiving, should end up coming away with a victory in this Bengals game, especially considering how much more they need this win and considering the Bengals season is over. But the Bengals will likely try to play spoiler, and I wouldn't be surprised if they put up a fight in this matchup, but I will go with the Ravens to win. Moving on, we've got a matchup between the Raiders and the Eagles. The Raiders continue to be one of the worst teams in the entire league. They lost 24-17 against the Broncos in a game where that final score looks closer than it really was as they kicked a field goal for some reason with a few seconds left as time expired to put themselves down 1 score as opposed to 2. But it made no difference because they still lost the game and they kicked that field goal as time expired. It was a weird decision, but it just tried making that final score look a little better. Their offense, Brock Bowers continues to be really good, but really nothing else is that great on that offense. And their defense continues to be pretty abysmal. The Eagles, on the other hand, they're coming off their 3rd straight loss. This one on Monday Night Football to the Chargers in a game where Jalen Hurts had 5 turnovers after having only turned the ball over just a couple of times going into this game, including only 2 interceptions going into this game. And then he threw 4 in this game alone. He had only 1 going into the Black Friday game against Chicago just a week ago, and now is up to 6 on the season after just 2 weeks combining for 5 of those. He really needs to step up his performance and is going to get a Raiders defense that likely will allow for that. A.J. Brown now has 3 straight 100-yard games, though. Saquon Barkley had a big rushing touchdown on a fake tush push. And the Eagles looked all right at points and were in that game and brought it to overtime. But Jalen Hurts really cost them that game and needs to turn that around because he has become a liability, honestly, these past couple weeks and was just holding them to consistency throughout the first part of the season. If he can clean up his turnovers and the defense can continue playing as dominant as it had looked through the first handful of weeks, through their amazing start up until that Chicago game up until the second half against Dallas, even the week prior, I really do think the Eagles can right the ship. It may be a little too late for them to compete for the number 1 seed in the conference, but they still have a pretty good lead in the East to win that division, and I think the Raiders should be a good get-right game to turn their season around and end their losing streak of 3. Moving on, we've got a matchup between the Cardinals and the Texans. The Cardinals got dominated by the division rival Rams 45-17 on Sunday in a game where they just looked bad all around. Their defense was abysmal. The Rams put up their most yards under the Matthew Stafford era, and it was just a really bad performance by the Cardinals, who continue to be a bad team. They started off 2-0 and are now 1-10 since. Just an awful year for the Cardinals. There will be some coaching changes for sure in the offseason. The Texans, on the other hand, they're coming off a win over the Chiefs on Sunday Night Football 20-10 in a game where they looked really good. They looked like a complete team. Their defense continues to dominate. Their offense actually looked pretty good in this game. C.J. Stroud looked pretty decent. Their run game actually wasn't bad for once. And Nico Collins played really well. And if they can continue with this strategy of playing dominant defense and playing complementary offense, which they hadn't been doing through the first half of the season, but through their win streak have been doing, I think they can get a lot of wins, likely make the playoffs, and who knows, maybe even win the AFC South, as they are only 1 game behind the Jaguars and tied with the Colts. I think this should be easily a game in favor of the Texans, and I'm going to pick the Texans to win, and honestly pretty dominantly, as I don't think the Cardinals will be able to do much against that Texans defense. Up next, we have a divisional matchup between the Chargers and Chiefs. The Chargers, they're coming off a win over the Eagles on Monday Night Football, 22-19 in overtime, in a game where Justin Herbert played all right, but considering he was coming off a hand surgery on his left non-throwing hand less than a week prior, it was a pretty impressive performance, especially considering he was the team's leading rusher. He was putting himself in harm's way constantly. He got sacked 7 times and fought through it all, which was really tough of him considering he had just gotten surgery on his hand, and ended up coming away with a victory in overtime, leading them to a field goal, and then their defense stopped the Eagles. Their defense played really well with forcing 5 turnovers, just all around really good performance by the Chargers in a close game against a decent opponent. The Chiefs, on the other hand, they lost to the Houston Texans 20-10 on Sunday Night Football, and realistically, their playoff hopes are dwindling. They have been not the same team they have been in years prior. They have a losing record for the first time under Patrick Mahomes. Andy Reid was calling some weird 4th down going for it calls in their own territory in that fourth quarter, because it seems like this is just a different Chiefs team. They're not coming away with wins in one-score games very frequently. In fact, I think they only have one on the whole season, which compared to last year, they were undefeated in one-score games. It's just a very different season for the Chiefs, and it seems as if things are falling apart, and it's the end of a dynasty. So I'm going to go with the Chargers to win, because the Chargers still have some playoff hopes to live for, and while the Chiefs technically could still make the playoffs, it seems very unlikely. And so I'm going to go with the Chargers to win in what I think will be a competitive game, but ultimately go to the Chargers. Up next, we have another divisional matchup, this one between the Bills and the Patriots. The Bills, they're coming off a comeback win over the Bengals, 39-34, in a game where Josh Allen played like an absolute superstar. James Cook played really well outside of a couple fumbles, which were very costly, and the Bengals really did capitalize on that. But other than that, they played really well. Their defense, not very good, but they came up clutch towards the end of the game, coming away with a pick six and another interception, basically to give them that lead. And the Bills are opportunistic. They know the right times to come away with big plays, and they come away with victories because of it. The Patriots, on the other hand, they're coming off a bye. They're 11-2. They're likely going to win the division, as the rest of their schedule for the rest of the year after this Bills game is really easy. And so I am still, despite how uncertain this game may be, and it possibly going in either direction, in which case I am actually going to pick the Bills to win this one, because their playoff hopes rely through the wild card and possibly winning the division by beating the Patriots and winning out and hoping the Patriots have a couple more losses. But even with the Bills winning this, I still see the Patriots winning the division because of how easy the rest of their schedule is, how consistent they are as a team. And so even though I'm going to pick the Bills to win this one, I ultimately don't think it makes that much of a difference to either team. It just helps the Bills get closer to clinching a wild card spot. So I am going to go with the Bills. Moving on, we have a matchup between the Jets and Jaguars, and I really don't need to go too in-depth into this one. The Jets, they're a really bad team. They lost 10-34 to the Dolphins. They're down to their third-string quarterback, as Justin Fields and Tyrod Taylor both got hurt, so they started an undrafted rookie. Didn't go very well, and they're just a really bad team, continue to be, have been all season. And Aaron Glenn might be the guy, as that team seems to have rallied around him in the past few weeks and actually come away with some wins, but this was a really poor performance against a division rival that's ultimately not that good. The Jaguars, on the other hand, they're coming away with a victory over the Colts in a game where they won 36-19. And yes, Daniel Jones tore his Achilles in this game and left pretty early, and they were going against a rookie in his first game action in Riley Leonard. But they were winning even before that, and you can only play who's in front of you, and they dominated that game. Their defense played great. Their offense played great. They have over 30 points in almost every game since their bye week. They're averaging over 30 points in games since their bye week. They are 5-1 since their bye week, and they've ultimately been playing really well. They've had some down moments this season. They've been a little inconsistent, but out of the bye, they've looked like a different team, more consistent. Liam Cohen has this team fighting. Trevor Lawrence playing much better. That offense looking great. Jacoby Myers looking like one of the best trade deadline acquisitions, as he continues to be excellent for this offense. And I am going to pick the Jaguars to beat the Jets pretty handedly, as I think the Jaguars are on their way to a playoff berth and ultimately could win the AFC South, as they now are in the lead of it. Will they let it go? Probably not this week. Moving on, we have a divisional matchup between the Commanders and the Giants. The Commanders, they're coming off a dominant game against the Vikings where they got absolutely beat up and shut out. The Vikings, after having come off being shut out by the Seahawks, came away with a 31-0 win over the Commanders in a game where Jaden Daniels threw an interception and was chasing down the defender and ended up ultimately re-injuring his elbow that he had previously dislocated and left the game. And Marcus Mariota was not able to do anything against that Vikings defense, and the Vikings dominated them. They looked horrendous. The Giants, on the other hand, they are coming off a bye, and it really doesn't make much of a difference. This is not a great team. They have a lot of really good pieces, many of which are injured, unfortunately, but if Jackson Dart can continue to develop, that's their goal of this season. During their bye week, they ended up claiming the number one spot in the NFL draft, which is because every team ahead of them in the Titans and the Saints both won. So they now have the number one overall pick in the draft. They're looking to try to probably keep that pick. Not that they're going to tank, but they're not a very good team. But if there's ever a week they're going to get a win, I think it could be this one. And I think I'm going to pick the Giants to get the upset win over the Commanders, seeing as the Commanders are coming off an awful game. Dan Quinn, kind of on the hot seat at this point, even after having brought that team to the NFC Championship round in Jaden Daniels' rookie year. Just having the worst follow-up year. Their defense looks terrible, and he's a defensive-minded coach, and just all-around disastrous year for the Commanders, and I don't see it getting better here against the division rival Giants. Moving on, we have a matchup between the Browns and the Bears. The Browns, they're coming off a loss, 31-29, against the Titans in a game where, honestly, Shedeur Sanders played excellent. He had over 300 yards and 4 total touchdowns, looked amazing, didn't really turn the ball over, but their defense, the aspect of their team that's been so good all year, just collapsed against a bad Titans team. Cam Ward looked great. Tony Pollard had a career game, rushing for the most yards in a game in his whole career and against this Browns defense. And the Browns defense looked honestly very susceptible. Yes, Myles Garrett got his 20th sack, though, and is still on pace to get the sack record on the season all time. But the rest of that defense really did collapse in that game and didn't look very good, despite the offense having success for once. The Bears, on the other hand, they're coming off a loss in a heartbreaker, 28-21 against the division rival Packers, in a game where they went in as the number one seed in the entire NFC and then ended up losing the division to the Packers in that game and dropping all the way down to the number 7 seed in the NFC. They do play the Packers again in 2 weeks, and they had a way better second half, but the Packers dominated them in the first half, going into halftime 14-3, and the Bears couldn't really do almost anything on offense in that first half, as Caleb Williams looked really bad, and their defense looked really susceptible. In the second half, though, they really bounced back. They led a bunch of long scoring drives. Caleb Williams looked excellent up until the game-sealing interception that he threw right at the end that could have possibly brought the game to overtime. And who knows what would have happened in overtime. But he unfortunately threw an interception, which sealed the game, losing them the game by 1 touchdown. But considering how well they played in that second half and how dominant this team has been in second halves of games this year, it really was a good sign to see just how hard they fought in that second half. And even though they couldn't come away with a victory, who knows what this loss might do to this team and to their spirits, because Ben Johnson fights really hard for this team and the players fight really hard for him. And so maybe this is the wake-up call they needed to see they're not invincible. The Bears are definitely a better team than the Browns, and I'm going to go with the Bears to win this game pretty handedly, but I wouldn't be surprised if the Browns on offense put up a good fight, considering Shedeur Sanders played really well last week. If he can play really well against a Bears defense that, yes, while opportunistic and takes the ball away a lot, they're also very susceptible to big plays. So I wouldn't be surprised if the Browns offense and Shedeur Sanders, who got named the starter for the rest of the year, end up putting up a fight on offense. It will just be, can that defense show up and can Shedeur Sanders show up? And what version of the Bears defense will the Browns end up seeing? But I'm going to go with the Bears to win anyways. Moving on, we have a divisional matchup between the Panthers and the Saints. The Panthers, they're coming off a bye week. They had previously played really well, earning a win over the Rams and ultimately putting them back in the playoff picture, as now they are tied with the Buccaneers following the Buccaneers' loss for the division lead. Yes, the Buccaneers have the division tiebreakers over them, but the Buccaneers also just lost to the Saints, who the Panthers lost to earlier in this season, and the Buccaneers and Panthers still have 2 matchups against each other for the rest of the season, so that division could ultimately go in either direction. The Saints, on the other hand, they're coming off a win over the Buccaneers in a game where Tyler Shuck looked excellent. Their defense played pretty well. Their offense looked like a pretty good unit. And honestly, this was the best outcome they could have had, with besides potentially losing if they wanted, if their fans really care about having the better pick. But in this case, it seems like it was the best outcome because they beat a division rival who they hate and hurt their playoff chances, truthfully. And so the Saints played spoiler to the Buccaneers, and Tyler Shuck played great. Awesome outcome for them, but I am still going to go with the Panthers to win in what seems like a must-win game for the Panthers, so I'm going to go with them to win. Up next, we have a matchup between the Lions and the Rams. The Lions, they're coming off a win on Thursday Night Football over the Cowboys in a game where they won 44-30 and really took the lead and never looked back as the Cowboys were in the game the whole time but were trailing most of that game. The Lions looked pretty good on offense. Honestly, one of their best offensive performances all season. They looked like they just couldn't be stopped. And that has been the inconsistencies of this offense this year. They have the high highs. They score over 30 a lot. They score over 40 several times. But then they also have several games where they just can't do much. And unfortunately, their defense can be a liability at times. And it doesn't help that they lost Brian Branch to a season-ending Achilles tear in this game. And we'll have to see how that affects their secondary. The Rams, on the other hand, they're coming off a dominant win over the division rival Cardinals, 45-17, in what was Matthew Stafford and the Rams' best offensive performance in the Matthew Stafford era. They had over 500 yards for the first time under Matthew Stafford and just dominated that game, looked excellent in all facets of the game. They ran the ball incredibly well between Blake Corum especially and Kyren Williams, and then they threw the ball really well. Puka Nacua had an excellent game. Really, the only downside was Davante Adams was a little bit absent comparative to where he had been, but that's really just nitpicking. And it wasn't like he was bad in this game anyways. I am going to go with the Rams to win in a game that I think is a must-win for the Lions to have control of their playoff destiny. But I don't think they're going to be able to come away with the win, as I think the Rams are a superior team to every team in the entire league, maybe excluding a few in the AFC, and maybe excluding the Seahawks, who they play the following week. But seeing as this is a must-win game for both teams, as the Rams want to keep their 1 seed and the Lions are fighting for their playoff hopes, I think this will be a very close matchup, but I'm ultimately going to go with the Rams to win, as I think the Lions are slightly outmatched, and I think their defense is going to really be hurt by the lack of safeties that they have, as they're missing both of their starting safeties, and have been for a lot of the season, and now are without Brian Branch for the rest of the season. Up next, we have a matchup between the Colts and the Seahawks, and this is a weird one, because the Colts are coming off honestly the most disastrous game they could have imagined. They lost the lead of the AFC South to the Jaguars in a game that they lost 19-36 and were never in. But the worst part for them was losing Daniel Jones to a season-ending Achilles tear, and Riley Leonard, their third string, as Anthony Richardson is on IR with an orbital fracture in his eye. Riley Leonard also left the game right at the end and now has an injury. So the weird part about this is the Colts brought in Phillip Rivers for a workout. He passed his physical, and they signed him to the practice squad. Phillip Rivers' last game action in the NFL was in 2020 with the Colts. He brought them to the playoffs. They lost in the wild card round, but he had a decent season with them, and then has been retired for 5 years, entered the talks of Hall of Fame finalist, and then 1 day after his 44th birthday, signs to the practice squad of the Colts. If he gets signed to the active roster, he becomes ineligible for the Hall of Fame and gets delayed by 5 full years. He is also a grandfather, has 10 children. This is a very weird situation that has never been seen before. He would be the first grandfather to play quarterback in the NFL. It's just a weird situation. Well, what choice do they have missing their top 3 quarterbacks? Are they going to turn to Brett Rippon on their practice squad? Or are they going to turn to Phillip Rivers, who's now signed to their practice squad as well? It's really unclear what's going to happen for the future of this team, and the Seahawks are lucky to be facing them at this time when things are uncertain. The Colts also had Jonathan Taylor not have his best game, as he's had a few games in a row that really just have been disappointing considering the start he had to the season, especially considering he fumbled in this game. But I do still think the Seahawks are a better team. They dominated the Falcons. Their defense looks dominant. Sam Darnold is inconsistent, but playing well when he needs to. And I do think the Seahawks are going to win, especially considering all the uncertainties around the Colts. Who knows? Maybe if Phillip Rivers plays, maybe he has a legacy Phillip Rivers game. He's a Hall of Fame finalist for a reason. He's a very good player, but he's 44 years old. Who knows what he's going to look like in his first game action in 5 years? Probably not very good. So I am going to go with the Seahawks to win. Up next, we have a matchup between the Broncos and the Packers. The Packers are coming off a win 28-21 over the division rival Bears in a game where they took the number 2 seed in the NFL, took the lead of the NFC North, and ultimately are going to play the Bears for the lead of that division next week, almost certainly, assuming the Bears win their game, no matter the outcome of the Packers-Broncos game. The Packers played really well on offense. Their defense looked pretty susceptible, though, in the second half. They played dominantly in the first half, as Caleb Williams had very few yards, about 30 passing yards. Just a terrible first half for the Bears offense. But then the Packers defense started letting up big scoring drives in that second half, and ultimately came away with the game-sealing interception, which made that defensive effort in the second half look a lot better, but they looked susceptible. The Broncos, they're coming off a win 24-17 over the Raiders, division rival, in a game where their offense looked pretty good. Bo Nix played really well, and their defense played well enough. It's the Raiders. It's not really much of a surprise. And again, it looked like more of a 2-score game for almost the entirety of the game. The Raiders just kicked a field goal to make it 1 score as time expired, which still doesn't make sense, but makes the final score look a little less in favor of the Broncos. I do think, considering the Broncos are on a 10-game win streak, it is bound to end at some point, and of all weeks, it seems like this could be the one. The Packers are a very good team. They're coming off many wins in a row, some dominant performances, and they look really good, but they also look beatable when playing against the Bears, and I wouldn't be surprised if the Broncos are the team to beat them next, because the Broncos are a very good team. They're number 1 in the AFC for a reason. And this has a lot of implications for the entire NFL playoffs, as the Broncos are the 1 seed in the AFC and the Packers are the number 2 seed in the NFC. And they're both in very close matchups. Packers within their own division. So I think both teams are going to be fighting hard. I think this will be ultimately a very close matchup. But I'm going to go with the Broncos to win in a very close matchup that I think the clutchness of Bo Nix and the fourth quarter Broncos ends up being the difference. Up next, we have a matchup between the Titans and the 49ers. The Titans, they're coming off a win for once over the Browns, 31-29, where they stopped them on the 2-point conversion to win the game. Cam Ward looked great. Tony Pollard looked great, having a career game. Their offense just looked great all around. Their defense didn't, but that's no surprise. Their defense actually looked really bad, as Shedeur Sanders, in one of his very first starts, ends up passing for over 300 yards and has 4 total touchdowns. But ultimately, the Titans' defense we knew was not very good. The 49ers, they're coming off a bye in which they moved up from the number 7 seed to the number 6 seed as the Bears fell from 1 to 7. And they look like they can make a run. They are getting healthy at the right time, as all of their players seem to be back, with the exception of the season-ending injuries in Nick Bosa and Fred Warner. However, even with that, Fred Warner has a chance to come back at some point in the playoffs. He's exceeding expectations in his recovery and is ultimately going to make that push to try to make it back as soon as he possibly can. It seems like the 49ers, especially considering what their next few games are, very likely could make the playoffs and could potentially go on a run. It's yet to be seen what this team can do, but it's coached really well. Their offense is a little inconsistent, but it has a ton of upside. And their defense has played excellent in the past few weeks, especially due to coaching. And that's without most of their defensive pieces, some of which will be coming back in this upcoming game. They're also getting their kicker back, which fortunately Matt Gay in substitution has been decent, but it will be nice to have Eddie Pinheiro back for the 49ers, as he's been the most consistent part of that team. I think the 49ers should win pretty handedly over the Titans. I really don't see the Titans getting back-to-back wins, and I didn't see them getting a win in the first place over the Browns. So I didn't see them winning another game, and I still don't. I'm going with the 49ers to win pretty handedly. Up next on Sunday Night Football, we have a matchup between the Vikings and the Cowboys. The Vikings, they're coming off a win 31-0 over the Commanders following a game in which they got dominated by the Seahawks and were shut out. J.J. McCarthy looked great in his return. First game in his career without an interception, had 3 passing touchdowns, really good passer rating, and that team actually looked really dominant. Their defense looked great, their offense looked great. There really weren't very many problems. The Cowboys, on the other hand, they're coming off a loss 30-44 to the Lions in a game where the Lions led that game the whole time. Their defense looked awful and just did not look like the same defense that we had seen in weeks prior since the Quinnen Williams trade, and their win streak has ended. The Cowboys ultimately still have a chance because the Eagles lost to win that division, as they still are only a few games back, but it doesn't look like they have many hopes to make the playoffs, and if the Eagles had won that game over the Chargers, their hopes might have been gone entirely. I do think the Cowboys still are playing for more than the Vikings and are a better team, so I am going to go with the Cowboys in this game, but I wouldn't be surprised if the Vikings put up a very good fight. They're really trying to evaluate J.J. McCarthy through the rest of the year, and we'll honestly just have to see how that goes. But I'm going to go with the Cowboys to win. And finally, on Monday Night Football, we have a matchup between the Dolphins and the Steelers. The Dolphins, they're coming off their 5th straight win over the division rival Jets, 34-10. They looked really good in this game, both offensively and defensively. Devon Achane unfortunately left with an injury, but Jalen Wright stepped in really well in his absence. And this team looks so different from how they started the year, as they've gone on a win streak for a reason. They stand a chance, not a good one, but a chance to make the playoffs. The Steelers, on the other hand, they're coming off a division win over the Ravens in a must-win game to take the lead of that division and try not to give it back to the Ravens. They ultimately are in a tight race against the Ravens to win that division and need all the wins they can get. And I think they'll end up coming away with a win here, as yes, the Dolphins are also playing for their playoff hopes, but their playoff hopes are significantly worse than the Steelers. But I really wouldn't actually be surprised if the Dolphins win this game. I think the Steelers are going to be playing really hard for it because their hopes for the playoffs are higher and they need this win more. But I think the Dolphins have a very good chance to win in an upset. The Steelers look really inconsistent. The Dolphins are on a win streak since firing Chris Grier, their GM, and I don't think that's for no reason. I think that's because they're rallying around their head coach and Mike McDaniel. They don't want him to get fired. And I think they continue to win games because of that, trying to make a playoff push. And while I ultimately don't see them making the playoffs, I do think they stand a very good chance to win this game. And I'm actually going to go with the Dolphins to win in what I think will be a close game, but will ultimately go in the Dolphins' favor. Thank you guys so much for tuning in and listening. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe, and follow me on all of my socials. I post podcasts on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, and Spotify, and I've been posting short form clips on LinkedIn, Facebook, YouTube Shorts, TikTok, Twitter, and Instagram. So give me a follow at Stadium Stats. The links are in the description for every single one of my social medias, so don't forget to follow me on all of them, as I will be posting content on them as consistently as I can and as frequently as I can. So please don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe, and tune in and watch the content, as your support really means a lot to me and really allows me to keep growing as a channel and keep gaining an audience. So I really appreciate you guys for that. Don't forget to tune in next time. Follow me on my socials, and thanks so much for tuning in. Peace.